This video is a discussion of gameplay and game design of a game that I've been working on that uses real-time path tracing. If you're here for the graphics, this maybe isn't the best video for you, but I'm going to start playing right now so you can look at some of the pretty path tracing graphics. But just be aware that what I'm going to talk about is gameplay and game design stuff. So feel free to watch a little bit and then leave. If you're here to hear about game design, then welcome. One caveat I should give is that this is going to be less organized and formal than most of my videos, a little more stream of conscious. So I'm going to try and front load the information so the most important stuff will come at the first. If you find that I start to ramble afterwards, then feel free to leave, because that's kind of what this video is about. It's just me talking about things that I did to make this game. Okay, so with that being said, let's describe what this is. It's kind of a mix between Breakout and Big Bird's Egg Catch on the Atari 2600, and then also some Tetris. So the way that it works is you have these blocks that you can break with the ball like you see, but then you also are supposed to catch the blocks. So when they fall, there I caught one. This one I'm going to pass, and if I miss it, you can see that there's a penalty at the top. More blocks get added. But also if I don't hit a ball like right there, then random blocks like that orange one fall down. So the idea is that you survive as long as possible. Once the blocks reach the bottom, then you lose and the game's over and it starts again. And there's kind of a trade-off that the player is supposed to learn. So generally you want to hit the ball and catch everything, but it's better to hit the ball and not collect the white blocks, and it's better to catch the silver block even if it means missing the ball, and it's best to catch the gold block rather than even if it means missing the silver block. So those are the sort of informal rules that I want the player to learn. And then the pace of the game is supposed to be, starting out, it's pretty chill and it's just fun to bounce the ball around and anticipate where it's going to go, with the occasional catching. But then as the game goes on, it gets harder, and by the end it becomes more frantic and more of a catching game. So there's the summary. Let me talk about how this game came to be and some considerations. I always knew that I wanted to do Breakout. I wanted a game that would show off the real-time path tracing, and I thought that Breakout would be a good way of doing that, because if I make the ball the light, or said the other way around, if the light is the ball itself, then it's going to move around a lot and show that everything's changing dynamically. So in some ways, this game doesn't look as good as a standard game that uses modern graphics techniques. So I thought if I highlighted the strength of what this path tracing can do, then that might be nice and show something that most graphics wouldn't be able to do, which is update so quickly. You can tell that the light is constantly changing position, and the blocks are changing color, and the floor is changing color, and they're moving around, and that's all handled dynamically. So that's where the idea of Breakout came from. It seemed like an easy game, or at least a feasible game to make. You know, it's pretty simple, but I also thought it would show off the graphics. So that's where the core idea came from. But then I knew that I wanted to have other mechanics involved also. One of the things I thought about a lot was having a controller where you had to use both sticks to do two different things. So I thought there would be one controller, like let's say your left thumb, that would move the paddle left and right like I'm doing now, but then you'd have to use your right thumb, your other thumb, to do something else. So there would be two different games going on. And I thought it might be nice to have juxtaposed, like one thumb would have to catch things, so you'd have to make sure that it intercepted the ball, but the other thumb would have to avoid things, so maybe there would be stuff falling down that you would have to purposely not hit. So you'd have to kind of have your brain do two different things at the same time with two different thumbs. I thought about variations of that idea a lot. But where it ended up, where you just have a single controller, arose out of me playing early versions. So let me talk a little bit about the history of how this game was developed. I started with just the ball bouncing around the walls and a paddle, so there was no blocks at all. And crucially to where this game ended up, I found that was pretty fun for me. Even though there was no goal and nothing to do, it was satisfying just to anticipate where the ball was going to be and try to get it. And there was no out of bounds. If it went and hit the wall behind me, it would just bounce back up, just like you're seeing right now. And so that experience informed a lot of the future game design, because when I did add blocks, I found that it made the game less fun. So I hadn't really played Breakout or Arkanoid or any kind of game like this in a long time, but I found that there are some pretty big game design flaws, at least for me, that it's the concept just isn't very fun. And so one of the things that I really discovered was that the end state of the game was kind of painful and boring. You'd get down to just having one or two blocks left, and then it would take forever to hit them, and it just wasn't fun. So the game was kind of inverted. It would start out more exciting when the blocks would be lower close to the paddle and things were happening, and then it got kind of boring and frustrating at the end when you were trying to hit those last few blocks. and if you remember that I said just bouncing the ball around the room was fun for me, I found that if I just had a single block, you would think it would still be fun because I was doing the exact same thing. I was just bouncing the ball around the room. But instead of being fun, by having that implicit goal of hitting the block, it suddenly became not fun. It was just really frustrating. I'm like, it's so hard to hit that final block, and I just want it to be gone. I'm not having fun at all. So I wasn't enjoying this inherent fun activity of bouncing the ball around. So there was lesson number one. I realized that trying to aim the ball and hit specific blocks was not fun. And so I needed some kind of game that capitalized what I did think was fun, which is trying to hit the ball with the paddle. So that had to be the main goal of the game, rather than hitting specific blocks. And with that realization and thinking about keeping it focusing on the Zen state, I also realized that I liked having the simplicity of the keyboard with two keys. Now, I still would like to make a game with the controller, so I don't think that what I'm about to say is good game design, but for this specific game where it was sort of evolving, I realized that I liked the idea of simplicity. So rather than my earlier ideas where there was going to be two different things going on, I had to find a way of having the extra mechanic still fit into just a single paddle. So that's where the ideas of the blocks falling down and collecting them came from. Rather than having two different things you control, you just have a single thing, but you still have two different goals in mind. You have to hit things, but then also catch them. And this game that I referenced earlier, Big Bird's Egg Catch, was one of my favorite Atari 2600 games. I've learned later from the internet that it was a clone of another famous Atari game called Kaboom, I think, made by David Crane, the same famous person who made Pitfall. But we didn't have that game as a kid, so I've never played Kaboom. But we did have Big Bird's Egg Catch, and it was really fun despite being sort of a target for young kids Sesame Street game. And so that's where the idea of catching stuff came from. And I think it works out pretty well. This game feels like it's familiar. I think people playing would catch on to what they were supposed to do pretty quickly, but it also feels different to anything I've ever played. I mean, maybe something like this is out there that I don't know, but it feels like I've synthesized something new. But the other influence is Tetris. And what I liked about Tetris is the pace of the game. And so, again, keeping in mind that I thought Breakout was inverted, I realized that I could start the game with the blocks at the top. And so when you start playing, you are in kind of that Zen state that I thought was fun. In fact, I'm gonna reset the game for a minute just to show that. So here's the first of the game when I start. So notice, even though there's blocks, you're always going to hit something. And so what you're doing at the first of the game right here is exactly what I said was fun for me. You're just watching the ball, anticipating where it's going to go, and moving the paddle. And I do think this is actually pretty fun. So when a block gets hit like that, it gets restored, something takes its place. So you never have this problem of trying to hit a specific block and being frustrated about it. You're always hitting something, and in fact, you're focusing on just hitting the ball. But then what happens is occasionally the blocks start falling down and you collect them. So keeping Tetris in mind, the more you play, the blocks are going to start filling in, and then as they get closer to you, the game becomes quite a bit harder. Right here, it's pretty easy. You're just kind of chilling out, enjoying the inherent bouncing the ball around. But as they get closer and you have less reaction time, the game becomes much more frantic. And you have this idea like, maybe I can recover, but maybe not, and I'm just trying to survive. And it has that kind of feel from Tetris that I really liked. Now, I didn't perfectly capture the Tetris feel. I'll talk about that more, but that's kind of the idea of the game. And then this idea of different blocks and trying to think of trade-offs was sort of inspired by Dark Souls, which is a funny inspiration. But there's this kind of idea in there when you're playing Dark Souls, especially against bosses, but that you don't want to get greedy. Meaning that in a lot of other games, you just kind of go in and start mashing the attack button and trying to hit things, but that doesn't work at all in Dark Souls. Instead, you have to be a little more patient. So you have to wait for an opening, get the hit, and then don't get greedy. Don't try to get 2 hits. Just get the 1 hit and then go back to waiting for an opening. And I'm sure there's plenty of other analogies for the principle I'm talking about, but that's kind of what I had in mind. And I thought it would be nice to try and capture some of that same idea of trade-offs. So I find that when I play this, there is a tendency to get greedy. You don't want to miss the ball, and you don't want to miss blocks. And so sometimes you have to make trade-offs and say, I need to do this, and that just means I'm going to sacrifice something else. In this early phase that I'm playing right now, it doesn't happen much, but it just did, so I should have said it right there. But there, I'm hitting the block and not collecting the white blocks. I'm hitting the ball, but not collecting the white blocks. So there's an example of me making a trade-off. And right here, I can do both. But when I see that silver, I want to drop everything and get it. When I see gold, no matter what else, I need to get that. And so that's the kind of don't get greedy thing that I wanted to encourage, where as you're playing and there we go, I had to get the gold and totally sacrifice those other things, but it was worth it. If you follow those rules, especially in the early game, you'll do pretty well. You can see that I still have just a single row of blocks, so I'm playing basically perfectly, but it hasn't been too hard. So the trick is to train yourself to make these trade-offs. But then, as you miss things, as you make trade-offs, whether intentionally or not, you'll see that things start to happen. You'll get random blocks in the middle like that, and also blocks will start collecting up above. And so the game becomes harder. Or there, I missed gold, not intentionally, but you can see that blocks came up there at the top. So the more mistakes you make, the harder the game gets, and you'll eventually lose. Kind of like Tetris. I also, just while I'm thinking about it, I programmed some acceleration into the paddle, and this was a tricky thing to try and tune right, but I don't want it to feel sluggish when I'm moving in a single direction, so the acceleration had to be pretty fast. But I want it to also be like if I'm moving to the right and I start moving to the left really quickly, there's a delay there. It's probably not noticeable if you're just watching, but that means that you do have to kind of anticipate what direction you want to go, and if you suddenly change your mind, there's a little bit of a delay. So there's another example of that gameplay element where I feel like you have to sort of train your brain to commit to something, which is interesting. But then having like that silver block right there where the ball can do unexpected things because there's these blocks that aren't in the pattern, they're just out in the middle of space, also gives an interesting gameplay element where you do have to react quickly. So again, hopefully the pacing is at the first of the game. You're focused on this pure, just anticipating where the ball's going to go, what I think of as the Zen state. And then as time goes on, more and more, you're focused on reactions. And the game does get harder, not just inherently, but there are some things I do, which I'll talk about in a minute, that as time goes on, it starts getting harder. So the game evolves from the sort of chill Zen state to more of a reflex reaction time, frantic, catching things, fast-paced game. And I think that works pretty well. Let me talk a little bit about some of the history and some mistakes I made along the way. So the general shape that I just described is what I had in mind, but it took a while to get there in terms of specifics. And one of the things I noticed early on was that the game was a little bit challenging, and so it was pretty easy to get into the end game state where you felt like, oh, it's hopeless. But then, even though it felt hopeless, the game didn't end. And so there was no way to really recover and get back to the early game, but it was hard to lose. And so you felt a little bit like you were a mouse and the game was a cat that was playing with you before eating you. So there was no chance of getting away, but the game wouldn't just get it over with and eat you. And that was a problem. It was actually pretty frustrating. And what I initially tried to do to fix this problem was to make the end game easier so that it was possible to recover, so that you always had this chance of, no, I can get out of this. I can fix it. Just like in Tetris, you know that you can, if you do the blocks right, you can get back to a good state again. So that was my first, that was my first approach. But that didn't work very well. It was a pretty interesting lesson for me to learn. What I started doing was making the game easier when you were about to lose. So I changed a bunch of things, but it was based on how poorly you were doing. And I tried to be sneaky about this so that as a player you didn't necessarily realize what I was doing. It still felt like the same game, but I tweaked it enough so that it was possible to recover. And I got that working pretty successfully. It did exactly what I wanted. But the funny thing that I realized was that when I did recover, it wasn't this happy, euphoric moment. I didn't feel like I had triumphed. I maybe did a little bit. I guess there was a feeling of triumph, but it wasn't a feeling of relief. Instead, I kind of thought, oh no, here we go again. Now I'm back and I just have to do it all over again. It's funny and hard to explain, but it was kind of a sense of, oh no. And so what I realized is that I didn't actually want to recover as a player. I kind of wanted the game to end. So it took me a while to get there, and it was counterintuitive, but so I got rid of all that tweaking that I did and went back to the drawing board and went the other direction. Instead, I thought, how can I try to make the game harder so that you lose at the end? And here, while I'm talking, you can see that I'm at the end state. So things have become frantic. I definitely don't feel like I'm going to recover now, but I'm still having a good time. I'm collecting stuff because it feels like the game is going to end soon. So I'm like, how much can I collect and just survive? And there I lost. So so good. There was a good example of what I was talking about. The game didn't last too long. It was still relatively fun, and I ended the game, and now I can start again. So yeah, so I went back to the drawing board and tried to figure out how to make it harder to control the pacing a little bit better. So two things happen. One, the ball gets faster. I don't know if you notice, it's slower now than it was right at the end before. And the other thing that happens is that the probability of the blocks that you catch change. So right now, you're most likely going to get the white blocks, and then fairly likely to get silver, and not very likely to get gold. So it's a rare thing. But the longer you play, it becomes much more likely to get silver, more likely than the white, and gold becomes more likely too. So you start seeing more metal. And the nice thing about this that seems obvious in retrospect, but it took me a while to get there, is that rather than the game cheating and treating the player like, oh, okay, I need to go easy on you, the game isn't doing anything behind the player's back. It's getting harder as time goes on, so everybody has a level playing field, and that feels a lot better. So now the game doesn't last too long. There were times as I've been tweaking this where I could be playing for a really long time, basically forever. As long as I was doing the correct trade-offs, I could just keep going. But now after playing and tweaking these things, the games don't really last longer than 15 minutes. Now, I don't know how long someone would actually want to play this, but that time feels about right to me. Most games are actually shorter than that for me. So I assume that if it's someone that hasn't played as much as I have, then they probably won't make it to 10 minutes. They probably will make it longer than 5, probably less than 10. And if they really like the game and keep practicing, then their playtime is going to get closer to 15 minutes, but probably not longer than that. And that feels pretty good to me. And I also think it has a nice, um, even though I like the Zen state, the part I'm at right now where it's going slow and I'm just responding to the ball is my favorite part of the game. I think it's the most fun. But it does get boring if this is all that happens. So I think having the game get harder is a much better solution than what I was doing before, because you have enough time to get into it right now. I'm having fun and kind of learning how it works. But there's going to be a point where I'm going to start noticing, oh, the ball's going faster. And hopefully I do it gradually enough that the player doesn't actually notice it happening specifically, but they will eventually notice, oh, this feels, like, oh, things are getting serious. And so that feels a lot more fun. It doesn't have the same risk of, well, it has less of a risk of getting boring. And then that in itself is probably enough to make players lose, but maybe not as fast as I wanted. So by changing the probability, it also, I think, makes it feel to the player that it's okay to lose, because the gameplay shifts, and rather than feeling like, oh no, I missed the ball, I'm bad, you start feeling like the only thing I can do is try to collect these silver and gold bars. and so the nature of the game changes, and you start getting into it's more of a collectathon, whereas here early game it's more of a Zen, hit the ball with the paddle but also be aware and catch things when you need to. The game changes over time to become, I just need to catch these metal things. and then by the end, like we saw earlier when I died, by the end it's just a frantic collectathon. You're not going to survive, but by having those extra gold and silver bars, it gives you something to focus on. It's both a curse, because those are the things that really make the game end quickly, but also it gives you something to focus on when so many things are falling at the same time. And I think as a player, it gives you permission to not feel bad. It's as if the game is acknowledging, like, it's okay. You're not supposed to be able to do this. This is too hard. Just do your best as the game finishes, and you can try again later. One thing I have thought about, though, which is maybe a flaw in my game design, is that you don't get any rewards for getting the gold and silver thing. The only thing you do is avoid penalties. So they're really bad if you miss them, but you don't get anything good for getting them. And I went with, well, I initially went with the metal. The idea came from showing off the path tracing, because I think the metals look cool. But even early on, I had this idea to do gold and silver because there are built-in connotations about them being valuable. So I thought, without me giving any explanation to the player, that would help them to know that, oh, I should really get these. Early on, it's hard to tell what happens when you miss one. Here, I'm going to miss this gold one on purpose. And we were looking and we saw all the block. Well, I didn't warn you, so maybe you didn't notice, but you can see the blocks at the top. Okay, watch. I'll miss the next metal. Okay, I'm going to miss that silver one. Watch the blocks at the top. So there, we got a whole row. But when it's in the early game, it's not obvious because of the perspective. It's not obvious what's happening. As the blocks get closer to you, it becomes much more obvious to see those rows scooching up. But so I thought that making it gold and silver, where you have, if you've played video games, you already know, yes, I'm supposed to, if it's gold or silver, I'm supposed to get it. I thought that would be a nice shorthand. But it does feel a little bit like I'm, now that I missed those blocks on purpose, I've made the game harder for me. Oh well. I do feel like I'm lying to the player a little bit, because I'm using this understood trope of get the precious metals, but you don't actually get anything for it. It's just bad if you miss it. So I've thought a lot about, should I add gameplay elements, like if you get things, do they get rid of blocks, or do they change the state of the blocks, or do they make the ball go slower, or give you like slow motion mode for a minute? I've thought about things like that, but so far I haven't decided to do that. It feels like something I don't really want to. I don't know. It feels like that takes away from the game that I want. But my best, well, I shouldn't say my best, but the idea so far that I like is to keep score. So you don't actually get anything for getting gold and silver blocks, but at the end of the game could tell you how many of each kind of block you collected, and it could tell you how long you lasted. And then you have some kind of, you have some kind of stats, and then there's some motivation. And so I think that might be a simple change that would get around this problem, where you do feel good for collecting things. It feels like, oh yeah, that was good because it added to my score. So it wouldn't change the game. It wouldn't change the actual gameplay at all, but it might feel like these are a reward and you're collecting them for a reason, and then you can, compare how you did. So that might be something I do. Okay, so notice the ball is moving faster. We're in this frantic state now. No longer am I thinking like, oh, I'm gonna hit the ball and intercept it. I'm just trying to survive and get, collect medals. So this is kind of the end game that I was talking about. The ball wasn't going as fast as it could have been because I lost earlier. I don't know how long I was playing that particular game, but so it gets even faster and the probabilities change even more. But that gives you an idea of how the game progresses. I think that's about all I wanted to talk about. And this video's gone on long enough. It has been pretty fun to do this. I'm a graphics programmer, so I've never done gameplay before. And sometimes you play games and think to yourself, oh, why do they do it that way? Or I could do better. There's always this kind of armchair game designer at play. And so it's been fun for me to actually have a chance to see, could I do it? And I think I've come up with something pretty fun. I don't think it's going to be as popular as Tetris. Unfortunately, I don't know if anyone besides me will ever play it. But it does feel like I've accomplished what I wanted to do, where I've made something that has good ideas, but also I had to just learn by playing and tweaking, and some of the things I thought would work didn't work, and I've had to kind of learn that and make something that is fun for me to play. So that's been good. I don't think I would consider myself an expert game designer, but at least now I can think to myself, hey, I did something and I was able to make something fun. And even aside from that, I like this game that I've come up with. Like I mentioned before, it feels like a familiar idea because it incorporates elements of other games, but it also feels like something kind of new and interesting that I'm happy to have made, that didn't exist before and isn't just a clone of something else. So if you're still with me, thanks for watching. Future videos will probably go back to talking about graphics, or maybe other things like sound, I don't know, but probably go into more features. I think the game itself is pretty close to its final state. I obviously will still tweak things that I've talked about, but I think the mechanics and game that we see here is what it's going to be. So future videos will probably be more like my more traditional videos and focus on engine technology and stuff. So thank you for watching.